Well, thank you, Sue. Good morning, everybody. Strategist for ODEN. I know we've got people tuned in this morning from different places around Ontario and the country. So if you take a sec to tell us in the chat where you're from geographically, that would be great. I want to start off this morning briefly with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge the land on which we're hosting this event today and where we'll celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month in October. For thousands of years, this land has been and continues to be the traditional land and home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to celebrate NDEAM on this land. Well, whether you're working remotely today or you're in the office, hey, thanks for taking the time out of your morning or your noon hour or so if you're joining us from somewhere in Atlantic Canada to tune in virtually for this look at the 2024 NDEAM campaign that we're launching in about 27 days. October starts on a Tuesday this year. So Tuesday, October 1st, that's the official start of the first full business week of National Disability Employment Awareness Month 2024, or NDEAM for short. Our aim for this session, as always, we want you to leave feeling energized about NDEAM and getting involved in this year's campaign with us to help us all keep the conversation about disability inclusion going. So I'm going to use my best podcast voice to make this as dynamic a presentation as I can. Sue's mentioned that she's going to be monitoring the chat, so keep your mic turned off and save those questions for the end. On that note, let's get started with this NDEAM 2024 look ahead. If you could advance the slide, please. Many of you on this webinar this morning aren't familiar with NDEAM, of course. In case you're joining us for the first time this year and you're not, well, a quick recap of what NDEAM's all about. NDEAM's been observed for decades. It's an annual month-long celebration every October that recognizes the many ways people who have a disability contribute to businesses and their communities. Now, it was started originally as a week-long event in the US in 1945 following World War II. It was started to recognize combat veterans who had a disability, and it evolved into a month-long celebration 36 years ago, way back in 1988. Here in Canada, NDEAM was first proclaimed by the province of Manitoba in 2010. The governments of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario all recognize NDEAM each October. And down in New Brunswick, the Premier's Council on Disabilities recognizes and promotes NDEAM. And the federal government also recognizes the month. And you know, in 2021, some parts of the country started recognizing NDEAM for the first time by participating in the flagship event of our NDEAM campaign. When it went national, the events become synonymous with NDEAM across Canada. Of course, many of you know I'm talking about Light It Up for NDEAM. More on that in a few minutes, but right now, a bit about what NDEAM's all about. You know, it raises business, community, and societal awareness that disability inclusion in employment is essential for everyone to achieve their full potential. Access to employment and being able to fully participate in the economy, in work and business, and in their communities, well, that's a basic human right for everyone who has a disability, just like everyone else. That's all laid out in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, when I say everyone who has a disability, well, we're talking about a lot of people. 16% of the world's population, or over 1 billion people. But here's the other big thing about NDEAM. It raises awareness that businesses need to recognize and understand that disability inclusion and accessibility isn't just a matter of compliance with legislation or a social responsibility. It's also a strategic business imperative that can drive growth, innovation, and competitive advantage. So NDEAM really continues to be a vital month. It helps raise that awareness, keeps that conversation going, and helps lead to action on disability inclusion that ultimately will benefit everyone involved. Next slide, please. So that's a quick history and the importance of NDEAM. Now, let's take a quick look at what are NDEAM campaigns designed to do. Our aim always is to get you thinking, motivated to get you involved, and inspired to take action. So that's why we always work hard to develop an NDEAM campaign that's engaging, interactive, and has a lot of different elements. What you do during NDEAM really depends on which lens you're looking through this morning. If you're looking at NDEAM from the community services perspective, maybe that starts with engaging a local business and opening a conversation about their labor needs, or hey, going to a Chamber of Commerce after 5 networking event and connecting with businesses that way. On the flip side, if you're looking at NDEAM through the business lens, maybe that action is just taking a first step on the inclusive hiring journey during NDEAM, because it's a long-term journey that takes time, effort, and proactive commitment. Next slide, please. All the elements of our NDEAM campaign are built around this core, the theme. This year, our question for you is, how will you be a disability inclusive employment champion with us in October? For NDEAM 2024, we're exploring the essentials of embracing disability inclusion to go far beyond compliance, break down barriers, and enrich workplaces. Lots of engaging and informative elements. Now, if you participated in NDEAM with ODEN before, you'll see this year there are more elements than ever since ODEN started recognizing NDEAM in 2016. Lots of ways to get involved and some really exciting new additional elements this year. I'll get to all that in a few minutes, but first, a bit about what's behind that championing disability inclusion in employment theme. Next slide, please. In part, we're recognizing the legacy of David C. Onley. He was the first working television journalist in Canada and the first Lieutenant Governor of Ontario who had a visible disability, and he was an unwavering champion of accessibility and disability inclusive hiring in Ontario, and he founded ODEN's Business Champions League. This year's campaign is somewhat of an extension of the David C. Onley Championing Disability Inclusion in Employment exhibit that ODEN held at the Withrow Commons Gallery in late March, down at Exhibition Place in Toronto. But the 2024 theme also focuses on what I mentioned earlier, that businesses need to recognize and understand that disability inclusion and accessibility isn't just a matter of compliance with human rights and accessibility legislation or a social responsibility. It's strategically important for businesses to stay successful. And also that the CEO or small business owner must be the primary champion of disability inclusive hiring, because disability inclusive hiring is really driven from the top down. So business leaders need a high level of disability awareness as well as the right attitude. And the theme also drives home that there has to be informed and aware collaboration. Employment service providers need a high level of disability and awareness and confidence too, because they too are disability inclusive hiring champions who play an essential role in helping businesses raise their level of disability awareness and confidence so there can be successful employment outcomes and experiences for everyone involved. Next slide, please. So why do we need these champions on both sides of the equation? Well, it kind of boils down to these two reasons. Disability inclusion in employment is vital for everyone to have the opportunity of achieving their full potential. And research has shown that workplaces, teams, and workplace performance are enriched by disability inclusive hiring. That 74% statistic you see on the screen is research by two professors at the London School of Business. Was published in a Harvard Business Review article titled Disability as a Source of Competitive Advantage. Next slide, please. And this is how the authors of that Harvard Review piece ended their article. It nicely sums up why championing disability inclusion in employment is so important. And I just want to take a minute and read that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do good in the world, but there's also nothing wrong with wanting to do well. And the latter is enough to employ people with disabilities. Next slide, please. A couple more reasons why championing disability inclusion in employment is important. Disability is on the rise in Canada, as the 2022 Canadian Survey on Disability showed. That 27% statistic on the screen is 8 million Canadians. That's up from 6.5 million in the 2017 CSD. Statistics Canada says there are almost 645,000 employable Canadians who have a disability. With disability on the rise, it's easy to extrapolate that there are going to be more employable Canadians who have a disability in the years ahead. And then there's research that shows being a disability inclusive hiring champion is simply good for business and your brand. A survey by the Angus Reid Group and the Rick Hansen Foundation found that 62% of Canadians would be more likely to do business with a company if they knew the business had specific policies to support employees who have a disability. And there was a Boston Consulting Group study that found companies with diverse executive teams had 19% higher revenue. And some of you may be familiar with Accenture research that showed that disability inclusive businesses have 30% higher profit margins than companies that aren't. Next slide, please. So let's look for a minute at what not championing disability inclusion in employment and not expanding their talent search to include job seekers who have a disability can mean for a business. And hey, the look on this fellow's face kind of says it all. A business affected by a labor shortage is 65% more likely to be a low growth company, according to the Conference Board of Canada. A November 2023 report by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business noted 53% of Canadian small businesses report labor shortages are hindering their growth. And that same CFIB report noted that in 2022, Canadian small businesses missed out on over $38 billion in revenue because they're short staffed. Next slide, please. Two other key things in this theme. Being a champion of disability inclusion and employment requires commitment because it's a journey, one with a lot of advantages over the long term. When you do these two things, everyone wins. Focus on disability inclusion all the time so it becomes business as usual. Now, the theme and ending present an opportunity for businesses to do all these things. Think about all the facets and importance of championing disability inclusive hiring. Look at whether they're being proactive or just ticking boxes to be compliant with legislation by reviewing their recruitment and hiring practices, processes, and programs, and the overall inclusiveness of their company culture. It's a chance for them to rethink myths and misconceptions about disability and employment that may be hindering them from that growth. And it's a chance to start the disability inclusive hiring journey now, but focus on disability inclusion every day and not just for 31 days during National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And one last important thing, well, if they're already committed to proactive disability inclusion, it's a good time for those kinds of businesses to think about being a mentor and a champion for other businesses. Next slide, please. I think this quote gets the point across, and I want to take a minute and read it because it was a really powerful one during the show. There are tangible things for disability inclusion that you have to do. I think a lot of people just lump it in one big circle and don't realize that disability inclusion needs to be embedded into every facet of business rather than just one little person that does everything. Lady named Kelsey Lindell made that insightful point in episode 26 of our You Can't Spell Inclusion Without a D podcast. She's a disability advocate and impact entrepreneur who's on a mission to disrupt the entire North American ad industry. She's out to change how people who have a disability are included and represented in the industry within 2 years. She runs Misfit Media down in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and her new initiative is called the Misfit 100. Hope you'll be sure to catch this episode that's out now. And I have to say, as the executive or as the associate producer, my co-host is the executive producer, I hope you will tune into that episode and every other podcast episode if you can't spell inclusion without a D. Next slide, please. So that's the backstory to our 2024 NDEAM campaign theme. To end the backstory, I want to leave you with this key message from our Championing Disability Inclusion in Employment theme. Business conversation and action on disability inclusion in employment needs to be continual this month. It's really a prime message for both businesses and employment service providers to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So now that key message around conversation about an action on disability inclusive hiring needing to be continual and not just happening during NDEAM, well, that's the perfect segue to this, the flagship event of our NDEAM campaign. But it's more than a national one-night coordinated lighting event. It's become a national movement that does spark that continuing conversation about disability inclusion in business, in employment, and in communities across Canada. Always the third Thursday of October, this year, Thursday, October 17th. 44 days, 7 Thursdays away, and it's a big year, the 5th annual Light It Up for NDEAM. Some of you on the webinar this morning may be familiar with this event and have participated in it before, and I hope you'll be involved in it again this year. If you're joining this webinar for the first time this year, or you haven't heard of Light It Up for NDEAM, well, there's no other event like this one during National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Now, ODEN leads this, but it happens through a whole lot of collaborative participation by other disability sector organizations, community organizations across Canada, and by the federal government. Last year, 45 federal buildings were illuminated purple and blue. And last year, almost 700 locations in almost 150 communities across the nations lit up purple and blue. This year, we're going for 700 plus. As of today, 186 locations in 81 cities and towns across Canada are on the list of locations for 2024, and including the Cabot Tower at Signal Hill and St. John's, and the CN Tower, Niagara Falls, and the iconic Canada Life building at Toronto. Those last three have supported Light It Up for NDEAM since it was started in 2020. And this year, for the first time, the well-known Peace Bridge between Fort Erie and Buffalo, New York, will be illuminated purple and blue. That was booked way back at the start of 2023. And several municipalities in Western Canada and the Maritimes are participating for the first time by lighting their city or town halls or other municipal structures. I want to name just a few of them. Out west, the Victoria Street Bridge in Trail, BC, the Promenade Waterfront Tower down in Bathurst, New Brunswick. Over on the island, the Town Hall in Three Rivers and the Town Lights in Surrey, PEI, and way up in northern Alberta in Fort McMurray, the Saline Creek Pedestrian Bridge. And out on Vancouver Island, the BC Legislature is lighting their fountains and ceremonial entrance, and the town of Ladysmith is lighting their signature signs. You know, this event has evolved into so much more than we ever imagined it would when ODEN conceived Light It Up for NDEAM back in 2020. It's become a common thread unifying local, regional, and provincial NDEAM campaigns across the country that it seems everyone wants to get involved in. There's just always so much excitement every year. So buildings, businesses, bridges, signs, and landmarks across Canada are going to be lit up purple and blue on Thursday, October 17th. So right now, my question to you all is, are you participating? Next slide, please. And here's where you can find out all the information about Light It Up for NDEAM. ODENnetwork.com/initiatives/Light It Up for NDEAM 2024. Visit this page to learn the details, how you can get involved and get others involved between now and October 17th, and how to start sending in your locations. And in these last 6 weeks or so, start getting those locations coming in more and more. Next slide, please. From the flagship campaign event to another big element of our NDEAM campaign. Media outreach has been a big part of our NDEAM campaign since 2019. We do an op-ed every year that's focused around the NDEAM campaign theme. This is the topic of our op-ed this year. We work with an external public relations agency, and they'll start pitching the op-ed in mid-September. Now, it usually runs during the first week of October when publications pick it up. As well, there's story pitching to media that's focused around the theme, which has traditionally seen great NDEAM coverage for us online, on radio, in print, and on television. Next slide, please. 2 virtual panel discussions in this year's campaign. This one on October 3rd is the highlight event of the first week in this year's NDEAM campaign. If you're joining us this morning and you're in the business sector, be sure to join us for this panel discussion about being proactive and fully embracing disability inclusive hiring practices. Registration for this webinar opens for an employment service provider because both employers and ESPs play an important collaborative role in proactively advancing disability inclusion to enrich workplaces and in turn, the communities that local businesses serve. Next slide, please. And we'll be wrapping up this year's NDEAM campaign with this panel virtual discussion on October 30th. It's going to be a dynamic one about why disability inclusion in employment and championing it is so important. No spoiler alerts here, but I can tell you it's going to be some great insights from the guests on that panel. Registration for that Zoom webinar opens in early October. Next slide, please. And then there's this Zoom info session. The Beyond AODA Compliance Project is a new initiative led by ODEN. It marks a pivotal step towards fostering genuine accessibility and inclusion in businesses across Ontario communities. This initiative goes beyond mere regulatory adherence to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA. It aims to instill a culture of enthusiastic, voluntary compliance, one that's driven by a deep understanding of the business and social benefits of embracing disability inclusion. Now, Oda will lead on this initiative, and she'll be talking about what it involves in 2 information sessions planned during NDEAM. Now, keep in mind, these info sessions are for employers in the private sector only. So if you're an employment service provider on the webinar this morning, let all the local businesses in your community know about these info sessions and get them to register for one of them. Businesses can find out more about the initiative and register for one of the 2 information sessions by going to the web page highlighted in the go-to path that you see highlighted at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Social media is also another element, a major one of our NDEAM campaign. And we've really enhanced it this year with all of these things that'll be coming across our social channels for NDEAM 2024. Watch for some really cool reels coming in October. Those 2 things that are bolded, visual statistics and disability insights. Well, if you're big on data and statistics, like this one, the 85% one you see on your screen, well, we always feature a disability statistic in a visual post every week during NDEAM, and you can do the same thing. The visual stats we post weekly will be in the NDEAM PR kit for you to post on your own social channels. More about the NDEAM PR kit in a minute or 2. And those stats are available in both English and French. And again this year, there'll be a Disability Insights visual quote, one each week, that you can also share on your social media. More on this year's Disability Insights in minute 2. Next slide, please. This year, we're in the 5th season of our You Can't Spell Inclusion Without a D podcast. And we're doing something a bit different this year around NDEAM and the campaign theme of championing disability inclusion in employment. Now, usually we highlight a new episode that's coming out during NDEAM. Well, this episode's actually airing the Tuesday before the start of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, but we deliberately planned our schedule that way because the final week before NDEAM seemed like the perfect time to do a show about Ontario's, and if not Canada's, most famous champion of disability inclusion in employment, and get people thinking about disability inclusive hiring before NDEAM starts. As I mentioned earlier, the disability inclusion conversation needs to be happening not just during NDEAM. So on September 24th, in the final lead up to National Disability Employment Awareness Month, be sure to catch this episode. Episode 27 is a powerful, emotional conversation with three guests: Sarnia Mayor and ODEN business champion Mike Bradley, Robert Onley, and award-winning lawyer and disability advocate Lauren McDonald. Now, in this episode, they reflect on the legacy of David C. Onley and the impact he had on both them personally and on disability inclusive hiring in Ontario. And then during October, we'll be publishing a companion blog post that's an excerpt of this conversation with a link back to the full episode. By the way, if you haven't tuned into You Can't Spell Inclusion Without a D before, it's on Podbean and all the major podcast distribution apps. And you can also find episodes on our website. And as co-host and associate producer of the show, I'll say, I hope you take in not only this episode, but all the existing shows. There are a lot of insightful conversations over the last 5 years that explore disability inclusion in business and our communities from all the angles. Next slide, please. And every year we do a two-part article series focused around the campaign theme. This is the series for 2024. Both parts of this series will be posted on the ODEN blog, and links will be added to the NDEAM PR kit on those release dates. Next slide, please. There's an interactive element too. Test your knowledge and awareness with our disability myth quiz. The quiz is something you can do or encourage all your contacts, colleagues, and people in your network to do during NDEAM or anytime. There's a link to it in the PR kit, in the interactive tools accordion, and on the main NDEAM 2024 webpage, which will be live soon. And the quiz too is also a good conversation starter. So encourage your colleagues, business contacts, and your network to test their knowledge about common disability myths. Well, you can promote the quiz on your social media. We'll be promoting it every week during NDEAM. And the quiz is available in English and French at the links you see on the screen. Next slide, please. Now, as always, this is a big element of our campaign because we foster participation in NDEAM, and that starts with the NDEAM PR kit. We created this to make participating in NDEAM easy for anyone who decides to get involved. There's a variety of tools, resources, and templates for you to use. Several of the campaign elements that I've just highlighted are part of the NDEAM PR kit, and the kit's easy to use. It's designed with accordions for a good user experience. Now, we build on this PR kit year on year. Once we add an element, it's evergreen in the kit. So you're going to find existing resources from previous years that you can use way back to 2019 when we first built the PR kit, plus the new ones for this year, the new article series, this year's visual statistics for social media posts, and major elements in the PR kit such as tip sheets, campaign teaser, and the visual statistics are available in English and French. Next slide, please. Well, have a look at this. The 2024 NDEAM teaser. It's ready. You can start sharing this right away, and because NDEAM start is fast approaching in just a few weeks from now. And look at that, a great new design for 2024. It's in both a public NDEAM 2024 PR kit, or it will be soon, I should say. And in the member portal, it will be there as well for those of you who are ODEN members. Now, if you're an employment service provider, use this year's campaign overview flyer in your area. And hey, if you're on the business side, circulate it in your network and organization to spread the word and get colleagues and contacts excited about getting involved in NDEAM 2024 and championing disability inclusion in employment. Next slide, please. These are all the ways you can use this year's two-part article series that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And the articles from our NDEAM campaigns back to 2019 too. This is where you'll find them in the NDEAM PR kit. And I mentioned, again this year, the two-part series will be posted on our blog, and the links in the PR kit go to the blog posts, and you can pick up the post to run on your blog as a byline guest post, or pick up the copy to provide an NDEAM column for local media. Now, if you do that, please include your organization and the Ontario Disability Employment Network. And as always, all the articles in the PR kit can be included in information packages you send out to local businesses. They're a great tool for building relationships. Next slide, please. I mentioned these a few minutes ago. Disability Insights, part of the social media element of our NDEAM campaign. They're included in the PR kit, so you can download these and share them on your social channels during NDEAM and any other time of the year. This year, we're focusing on a tribute to David Sionley with some of his most notable quotes about disability inclusive hiring and accessibility. This one is for week 1 of NDEAM. It's his most famous quote. It's a paragraph he included in pretty much every speech he made to organizations when he was Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Next slide, please. Tip sheets. They're another big element of the NDEAM PR kit. There are ones for businesses. Next slide, please. And there are ones for employment service providers. Next slide, please. And these ones were created last year to help anyone whose role includes creating content for social media, whether that's on a business's marketing team or you're on an employment service team. The second one we created to help everybody who participates in Light It Up for NDEAM with us take some great photos to share on social media, in part because we curate images that are posted and use some of the best ones in our Light It Up for NDEAM videos and the photo gallery. Next slide, please. And then there are these tip sheets, these ones that can help anyone who's involved in the hiring and recruiting process. Remember, you can use any of these tip sheets any time of the year. Next slide, please. As always, we've got these templates to help you do your own mayoral proclamation requests and media outreach during NDEAM. Now, you can use all of these as models to customize or create your own news releases. The news release templates marked with the red arrows, numbers 4 and 5, well, they'll be added in the weeks ahead. Our NDEAM campaign news release goes out on Tuesday, October 1st. The Light It Up for NDEAM national news release goes out 1 week before the event on Thursday, October 10th. So each of those news releases will be added to the PR kit the day they're distributed to media. And the one you see there that there's already a link to, that one was created to support one of our member agencies doing some local media outreach for Light It Up for NDEAM the first year it went national. So as with any template, all you have to do is change the year and dates and customize the text for what you need. If you're doing that, make sure you include a mention that this year is the 5th anniversary of Light It Up for NDEAM. If you're working now on a drive to get the word out in your community and get businesses participating, to get the word out that your organization is participating in Light It Up for NDEAM, well, hey, customize this template for your location and send it out to local media now. Next slide, please. Every year, we update the key messages and the quick facts that are in the NDEAM PR kit. They're standing items, as you know, if you participated in NDEAM with us in past years. While this year's specific campaign theme is championing disability inclusion in employment, all the points in the key messages doc are really evergreen because the disability inclusion conversation is a continuing one. The key messages about disability and employment, some ways to use it, points to get across in starting business conversations about disability inclusion. If you do media outreach during NDEAM, these are key points to get across in media interviews. There are also key points to get across in blog posts or in social media posts and any kind of NDEAM content you create. Now, when you're doing those interviews or writing those posts or articles, and you want to incorporate some of these key messages or quick facts from the PR kit, you don't have to always use the exact wording of a particular key message that we're providing. Change it up to fit the flow and how you'd say it. The idea is to get the message across in an engaging, informative way. We've refreshed the quick facts about disability and employment a bit for 2024, added a few new factoids about some of the latest information and statistics from studies and reports, but mostly the quick facts are evergreen. They can be used in any material you're creating any time of the year. There are a lot of points in this doc that are good disability inclusion conversation starters during NDEAM or any other time of the year. Next slide, please. So, are you energized? Have I done my job right? Are you ready to participate? Ready to be a disability inclusive employment champion with us in October? When you download the Leave Behind from the NDEAM PR kit, feel free to share it widely with your contacts and in your networks. Other sharing you can do to connect and engage during the NDEAM campaign. Share your own weekly posts of interesting, informative facts and stats related to the theme this year of championing disability inclusion and employment on LinkedIn, Facebook, and on X. Join in the theme with us. Promote your own success stories related to the theme and tag ODEN. Share our Disability Insights post every week. Listen to and share our podcasts. Organize a community event. Engage with your local government and businesses. And of course, get involved in the 5th Light It Up for NDEAM on Thursday, October 17th. Next slide, please. Now, the NDEAM PR Toolkit will be up on the website soon with all those resources that I've highlighted for anyone to use. Now, in addition to everything available to help everyone participate in National Disability Employment Awareness Month, each year there are some premium additional NDEAM resources we create or make available just for ODEN members. So you know what? If you're not an ODEN member, think about joining ODEN between now and the start of NDEAM to get access to these resources. Get in touch with Lila Jorgensen at the email you see on your screen. So let's have a quick look at the member-only resources for NDEAM 2024. This is popular with our members every year, so be sure to use it for NDEAM 2024. And you can see it's got a snazzy new design for 2024. This poster is always a good icebreaker to get a disability inclusion conversation started. You can use it as a leave behind after a meeting or a lunch and learn, put it up on office bulletin boards, share it by email in your network, use it as part of an info package, send it to business contacts as a thought you might be interested in this piece. And if you want your poster co-branded with your organization's logo, we're happy to do that. You'll need to get an art file of your logo to Sue Defoe by Friday, September 20th. You'll have your branded poster back before September 27th. That's the following Friday. Vector files, EPS, the long form for that, encapsulated PostScript files. They're what's preferred. They're what's needed by our designer to make sure your logo looks crisp and clean. JPEGs and PNGs aren't high enough resolution for this. Next slide, please. 2 great new tip sheets this year for both businesses and employment service providers. Traditionally during NDEAM, we've created one tip sheet that's for businesses and one that's designed specifically to help ESPs. But accessibility is an issue everyone plays a role in. So all your content, regardless of what sector you're in, should be accessible, especially video. Recent research has shown that nowadays, 91% of people prefer online video content from brands over other forms of content. And when it comes to documents, well, they should be accessible for employees, clients, and customers alike. We've co-created these tip sheets with Squarely Accessible and Accessibrand. They'll be doing a session next month, I should say in November, at our RDC 24 Rethinking Disability Conference. Both of these are great tip sheets to print out, share electronically again as a thought you might be interested in this, as a leave behind, and use as an info package. They'll be available in English and in French. And of course, these just for member resources are available exclusively in the member portal. Next slide, please. And to complement the new tip sheets, We're providing members with one of the new video elements this year, a series of 7 tips reels for social media based on our 7 tips for making sure your business is disability inclusive tip sheet. Each tip from the tip sheet is a separate video reel. You can spread them over the 5 weeks of NDEAM like we're doing, or use them anytime. And of course, again, these resources are available exclusively in the member portal. Next slide, please. And finally, we'll be putting out the NDEAM Special Edition newsletter again this year for members. It comes out Mondays during October with all the happenings and resources for the week. It'll have the links to items added each week to the NDEAM PR kit that are available to use, and it'll keep you energized. We hope, traditionally it does, about participating in NDEAM with us. Next slide, please. So now, are you jazzed? Are you ready to get involved and participate with us? I mean, hey, NDEAM's fast approaching. So again, my question for you is, how will you be a disability inclusive employment champion with us in October? Next slide, please. These are the hashtags for this year's campaign. Be sure to use them when you're posting and sharing content on social media. Well, that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over now to the audience for our Q&A. And if anyone has any questions, ask away. You can ask them live or put them in the chat. And you know what? If you forget what you were going to ask and think of it afterwards, that's perfectly okay. Just send me an email at the address on your screen. Thank you for being part of this presentation today and joining us.
Okay, Dean, I don't have any questions in the chat yet. So everybody, if you have a question, you put it in the chat, or you can take yourself, turn your microphone on and ask your question live. Okay, Dan from North Bay just said their NDEAM committee is almost ready, and he'll send a detailed run of their events once it's complete. So thanks, Dan. We look forward to receiving that.
Thank you, Dan. Dan, by the way, is one of our Lighted Up for NDEAM Ambassadors League ambassadors up in Northern Ontario. So if you got businesses up in Northern Ontario that are interested in getting involved, you can get them in touch with Dan. Wow, sometimes silence
I know. Okay. Well,
really is golden.
Yeah, it's 11:45 and we don't seem to have any other questions. So if in doubt, if you didn't write down Dean's email address, you can always send an email to info@odennetwork.com as well. And we will get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, I'm going to close out the webinar. Thank you everybody for attending. And we look forward to seeing you or noticing your involvement in NDEAM in October. Thank you.